No one expected it, least of all Princess Beatrice. When a sealed document from the Queen's private estate was finally revealed behind closed palace doors, the room froze. Her Majesty's secret wish had bypassed centuries of tradition, and it favored Beatrice. The Queen's most private and prized possession, a hidden art collection, had just been gifted to her. But why her? And why now? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began in a hushed chamber within Buckingham Palace, a space reserved only for the most sacred of announcements. Aides stood tense, eyes shifting nervously, as the king himself produced a velvet-lined envelope marked in delicate, fading script, "For Beatrice upon my passing." The silence was deafening. Inside the envelope was not a formal decree, nor a simple letter. It was a personal note from Queen Elizabeth II, written in her own hand, designating Princess Beatrice as the sole inheritor of a previously unknown royal treasure, a private art collection she had amassed, protected for over 6 decades. Gasps echoed across the room. Whispers turned into thunderous silence. The sheer gravity of the revelation left senior royals visibly stunned. Prince William leaned forward, fists clenched in disbelief. Camilla's face reportedly drained of color, while Prince Edward was seen exchanging glances with aides, struggling to comprehend the Queen's reasoning. Even King Charles paused, lingering longer than expected before continuing the reading, his voice faltering slightly. The weight of his mother's choice had left him momentarily shaken, but it was Beatrice who broke first. Overwhelmed, she crumpled into her seat, tears pooling as the realization took hold. This wasn't just a passing of heirlooms. It was a whisper from the grave, a message from a monarch who had held the nation together with stoicism, yet had saved her softest sentiment for one granddaughter. Beatrice, often overlooked in matters of succession and stature, had suddenly been chosen as the gatekeeper of something profoundly intimate. Camilla, blindsided and reportedly furious, exchanged curt words with her husband under her breath. Staff members later described the tension as electric and dangerous. The Queen's decision had not only elevated Beatrice, it had shaken the core hierarchy of the royal family. Every eye turned toward her, not in celebration, but in caution, confusion, and for some resentment. How could the Queen bypass her immediate heirs? Why entrust something so sacred to Beatrice, of all people? The answer lay in the final line of the Queen's letter, a cryptic, poetic sentence that now haunts the palace halls. "You saw beauty when others sought power." It was a message loaded with meaning, targeted not just at Beatrice, but at those she'd passed over. Those 5 words sliced through the monarchy's polished exterior, hinting at a deeper truth there. Division between those who protected legacy for history and those who sought it for control. The art collection wasn't just beautiful, it was a symbol of trust, a mirror into the Queen's heart. Now, a spark threatening to ignite royal war, but behind the Queen's poetic sentiment was a royal storm brewing, because this wasn't just art, it was legacy warfare disguised in brushstrokes. For decades, rumors swirled about a locked vault inside Windsor Castle, a space only the Queen accessed alone. Now its truth has surfaced. Inside, a private trove of paintings, sketches, and artifacts never seen by the public and never disclosed to the royal archives. What was the Queen hiding? And why did she leave it all to Beatrice? The tale begins with whispered conversations among senior staffers. Rumors of an inner chamber the Queen visited late at night, always alone, always unannounced. This room, unlike the others, had no attendants, no royal protocol, only silence and time. Over the years, archivists and advisors came and went, but none were permitted entry. Not even the most trusted footman knew what lay behind its iron-bound doors. And yet, its presence lingered, haunting the palace like an unfinished story. It wasn't until the Queen's passing that the locks were removed, the seals broken, and the collection's truth unveiled. Inside the room was a hidden kingdom of emotion and history, preserved not for spectacle but for intimacy. Experts summoned by the Crown to evaluate its contents were left speechless. A private curator described the discovery as an emotional earthquake. The contents were unlike any collection ever seen in royal possession. Self-portraits of Queen Victoria, raw and unfiltered, depicting agony rather than grandeur. Hand-sketched letters and sorrowful brushwork by Princess Margaret during her days of confinement. And then, the piece that silenced even the skeptics, a watercolor said to depict Princess Diana alone in a garden, tears streaking her face as she looked toward a shadowed palace. It was unsigned, unverified, and undeniably real, but what made the collection truly staggering wasn't just the art, It was the Queen's handwritten notes on the back of each frame. In crisp, slanted script, she annotated emotions, memories, and regrets. One inscription beneath a Churchill-era painting read, "He told me never to show them pain." But how can one lead a family without it? These weren't just works of art, they were confessions, windows into a soul the public never truly saw. Valued at nearly £180 million, the collection wasn't merely a bequest, it was an act of trust, a legacy no throne could carry, and no heir was ever meant to hold except one. Years earlier, during an unpublicized visit to Windsor, Beatrice had tea with the Queen in complete solitude. It was during this seemingly routine meeting that the monarch led her granddaughter to the locked chamber. She offered her no explanation, only a key and a single glance behind the door. That moment, fleeting, sacred, remained a mystery even to Beatrice. Until now. In hindsight, it wasn't a tour, it was a test. A subtle weighing of character beneath the clinking of teacups. Beatrice hadn't asked questions, hadn't rushed inside, hadn't even spoken of it to anyone. And that silence, that reverence, may have been what earned her the Queen's final most precious trust. And it was that very moment over porcelain cups and unspoken emotion that planted the seed of the Queen's ultimate gift and the Crown's ultimate division. In a monarchy built on hierarchy, this move shattered the royal order. Bypassing heirs like King Charles and Prince William, the Queen named Beatrice as sole custodian of her most sacred vault. Insiders are calling it an intentional act of rebellion against the future of the Crown. So why Beatrice, and why now? The monarchy thrives on lineage, protocol, and predictability, and yet, in one sweeping gesture, Queen Elizabeth II detonated all three. The decision to bestow the private art collection not upon her son, the reigning king, nor her grandson and future monarch, but instead upon Princess Beatrice, seventh in line and long overshadowed, sent seismic waves through royal bloodline. Behind closed palace doors, the word betrayal was uttered more than once, but the truth was far more complicated. Those closest to the Queen say the move wasn't a slight, it was a safeguard. Sources now confirm Her Majesty had grown increasingly concerned about Charles' ability to preserve the sanctity of personal legacy over public obligation. She allegedly referred to her son's style as transactional, worried that her most intimate collection could be turned into curated exhibits or diplomatic leverage. In her eyes, it wasn't about entitlement, it was about temperament. Prince William, on the other hand, stood as a symbol of forward-thinking royalty, a leader of modern causes, public reform and sleek visibility. But therein lay the problem. The Queen's collection was never meant for the spotlight. It was meant for remembrance, reflection, and private mourning. William's future-facing nature, while admired, simply didn't align with the past-soaked spirit of the collection. For the Queen, that past wasn't to be marketed. It was to be guarded, and only one member of the family had consistently demonstrated the restraint, the reverence, and the grace to do so. Beatrice. She was the quiet traditionalist, a royal who bowed slightly deeper, smiled a little longer, and remained out of scandal's reach. She embodied a kind of soft loyalty the Queen both respected and relied on. A loyalty not to the Crown, but to what it once meant. In one of the rare private recordings reportedly captured just months before her death, the Queen is heard whispering, "Some hearts are not built to protect beauty." Though no name is attached, many believe it was her quiet confession, her way of justifying a choice she knew would divide her family. Privately, there was growing concern that the collection, if handed to the institution itself, would be buried, either politically sanitized or hidden altogether. And worse, that parts of it could be appraised, insured, and ultimately monetized. Beatrice was the only one who didn't ask what it was worth, only what it meant. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, is said to have quietly supported the Queen's decision, even reportedly telling Beatrice, "She saw something in you that none of us were looking for." Camilla, however, was less forgiving. She viewed the gift not as a tribute to Beatrice, but as a direct threat to her own legacy. And while palace aides scrambled to contain the fallout, another revelation broke. This wasn't just a gift. It was part of a larger inheritance war. They had always been inseparable until now. Princess Eugenie, once considered the Queen's other quiet favorite, has reportedly gone silent. Sources close to the sisters describe a wall of grief between them since the news broke. But the deeper story reveals a heartbreaking letter, and a divide no crown can fix. It began with surveillance footage no one expected to surface. Palace security captured Eugenie's stunned reaction moments after the private announcement was made, standing just outside the Queen's archival study. She appeared frozen, eyes locked on the door, lips trembling but saying nothing. Those who saw the footage said it wasn't anger they saw, it was heartbreak. And behind that heartbreak was history. Years earlier, the Queen had made a promise, quiet and off-record, that both Beatrice and Eugenie would be honored equally in her final arrangements, a gesture to acknowledge their loyalty through years of scandal, retreat, and resilience. So when Eugenie discovered that Beatrice had been chosen, and that she hadn't known it, at once it felt like a betrayal. What followed was not confrontation but silence. Days after the news broke, a letter surfaced in Beatrice's private quarters, handwritten, folded in three, and signed only E. In it, Eugenie had written just one crushing sentence: "I just needed you to tell me first." That line struck deeper than any royal statement. It wasn't about inheritance or paintings or power, it was about trust, about a sisterhood that had quietly withstood the weight of royal scrutiny for decades, now beginning to fracture under the shadow of a secret vault. Palace staff began to notice the change immediately. The sisters who once laughed and whispered down quiet corridors of Windsor now passed one another in silence. At events, they stood on opposite ends of the room. Beatrice was said to be devastated, torn between honoring the Queen's wishes and grieving a relationship she no longer knew how to fix. Attempts at reconciliation were made, including a discar intervention by Sarah Ferguson, their mother, but her efforts were quietly rebuffed. Royal sources claim she was turned away from Beatrice's private suite by an aide instructed not to allow any unannounced visits. And then came the rose. Late one evening, as the halls of Windsor fell silent, a single white rose was discovered lying at the foot of the Queen's former study door. No note, no explanation, but everyone knew who had left it. It was Eugenie's final gesture, a quiet symbol of farewell, not just to her grandmother, but to the bond she once shared with her sister. But while grief and love collided behind palace doors, outside forces were already circling, hungry to twist Beatrice's windfall into scandal. Queen Camilla has long fought to cement her place in history, but insiders claim she viewed this secret inheritance as hers, a piece of royal prestige she was quietly promised. Now her fury is reportedly volcanic, and her words chilling. This was never meant for Beatrice. Behind palace gates, fury doesn't come with shouting, it comes in veiled threats, quiet commands, and strategic whispers. And Camilla, now Queen Consort, is no stranger to the art of influence. According to one leaked account, she was present when the details of the Queen's vault bequest were formally confirmed. She didn't speak at first, but when she did, her voice cut through the silence with calculated force. She demanded the collection be returned to the Crown estate, reportedly stating one granddaughter has the right to possess what was built under the royal seal. It wasn't just a matter of art, it was a matter of authority. And for Camilla, it was a direct insult to her standing. After years of clawing her way into public favor and royal legitimacy, the Queen's final act had left her out of the narrative entirely. Tensions quickly spread like fire through the corridors of power. Camilla allegedly confronted Prince Andrew, Beatrice's father, what one aide called a confrontation that nearly broke protocol. She questioned the legality of Beatrice's claim, suggesting the Queen had made the decision in isolation, without institutional counsel. Andrew, uncharacteristically restrained, defended his daughter but offered no clear pathway to compromise. The encounter ended cold. Staff on both sides were later instructed to limit communications between their offices. The palace had entered a silent war. Meanwhile, reports began to circulate from within Camilla's inner circle. One anonymous aide claimed she viewed the gift not just as a snub, but as a public degradation of her status. To give it to Beatrice, the aide allegedly said, was to rewrite the legacy Camilla spent 2 decades earning. In response, Camilla is said to have quietly lobbied key curators and advisors to block any attempt by Beatrice to publicly display the collection. Letters were drafted. Meetings were held. Influential allies within the Royal Collection Trust began to hesitate, uncertain if they were being dragged into a brewing constitutional dispute. As if the tension weren't enough, Beatrice herself became the target of disturbing backlash. Anonymous letters began arriving at her residence, some threatening, others filled with venomous accusations of theft, betrayal, and manipulation. Royal security was discreetly tightened, though the palace refused to comment on the threats. The pressure was mounting, and yet through it all, Beatrice remained publicly silent, absorbing the heat of a fire she never lit. King Charles, caught between his wife and his niece, refused to speak publicly on the matter. Those closest to him say he was deeply torn, respectful of his mother's wishes, yet painfully aware of the political consequences of inaction. The palace released no statement, no defense, no denial, just silence, which, in royal terms, says everything. But while Camilla fought to reclaim that legacy, Beatrice quietly turned to someone no one expected a figure from the Queen's past who held the missing piece of the story. For years she was just the shadow by the Queen's side, an elderly archivist with no title, no fame. But she held the keys, literally, to the Queen's private vault. And now she's breaking her silence, revealing the conversation that changed everything, and why the Queen chose Beatrice. Her name was Margaret Hensley, 84 years old, unassuming, virtually invisible to the public. Yet for nearly 5 decades, she was the silent guardian of Queen Elizabeth's most personal secrets, custodian of what palace staff referred to only as the eyes-only collection. She lived in a modest wing of Windsor Castle, worked without headlines, and answered only to one person, the Queen. Now, as Beatrice faced mounting pressure from the family and the world, it was Margaret who stepped out from the shadows, offered clarity that rewrote everything. Margaret recalled the day it all began. It was 1994. A rain-soaked afternoon, when the Queen summoned her privately, without aides, without protocol. The request? To build a second archive off the books, off the records, and away from the Crown estate. This was not to be maintained for state or succession. This is for the heart, the Queen reportedly said, and the heart has no interest in politics. Over the decades, Margaret collected, preserved, and catalogued hundreds of deeply personal artifacts under one condition. No one see them until the Queen is gone, and even then, only the person she chooses. The revelation came just a year before the Queen's passing. During one of their final teas together, the Queen confided in Margaret with a tone she had never used before. They discussed legacy. Not titles, not jewels, but what remains when duty fades. It was in that moment that the Queen spoke the line Margaret has never forgotten. Beatrice sees the soul behind silence. It was the clearest sign of intent she'd ever given. Not a command, but a confession. And Margaret understood EM. Immediately her task was nearly complete, but it wasn't. Just words that cemented Beatrice's place in this intimate legacy. Hidden inside the vault were several old cassette tapes, handwritten labels marked simply with dates and the Queen's initials. Among them, a single voice recording addressed directly to Beatrice. In it, the Queen's voice trembled slightly as she explained her decision. She spoke not as a monarch, but as a grandmother, protector, and woman burdened by decades of suppressed emotion. She spoke of family fractures, lost traditions, and the art of surviving behind glass. "What I leave you," she whispered, "is not to own. It is to protect from those who never understood why it was hidden." When Margaret played the tape for Beatrice in that same locked room, the princess reportedly wept without speaking. Margaret waited until the final words faded before saying her own. "This is more than art. It is memory. And memory is dangerous." A warning not just about the collection, but about the cost of carrying what was never meant to be exposed. The vault was not simply a gift. It was a burden, laced with truth and betrayal, beauty and wounds, and dangerous it would become because the press had caught wind of the story, and the hunt to expose the collection had already begun. The Queen's vault was meant to remain unseen, but a single leaked image, a sorrowful sketch of Princess Diana hidden in the collection, lit a firestorm across global media. Now, the press wasn't just watching Beatrice, they were hunting her. The sketch was raw, almost haunting. Diana's figure was turned slightly away, head bowed, and in the faint lines of charcoal, unmistakable tears rolled down her face. No one knew who drew it, no signature, no title, just pain captured in silence. When the image appeared online first as a grainy thumbnail, then splashed across international headlines, the storm exploded. Within hours, #Diana sketch trended across continents. Tabloid sites and mainstream outlets alike demanded answers. Who leaked it? Why was it hidden? And why had it been entrusted to Beatrice? Not displayed in public, not celebrated, not protected. Palace, blindsided, scrambled for damage control. But the fire spread too quickly. Whispers began to circulate, fueled by an anonymous source from within the royal staff, someone who allegedly had direct access to the collection's catalogue. The leaker, reportedly with ties to a tabloid giant, had lifted the image in secret and sold it for a 6-figure sum. They knew exactly which image would trigger the deepest reaction. Diana's ghost, once again, was being dragged into palace politics, and this time, it was Beatrice caught in the crossfire. Public opinion fractured. Some were outraged that the piece had been hidden at all. "It belongs to the people," screamed headlines. "This is our history." Others, however, stood fiercely in Beatrice's defense. They saw a young woman, left alone to carry the weight of royal memory, now being punished for honoring it in private. But the damage had already been done. Cameras followed her relentlessly. Reporters shouted cruel accusations through car windows. And then came the moment that shattered the illusion of control. Beatrice emerging from a quiet London gallery, breaking down in tears as paparazzi surrounded her like wolves. The images flooded social media. Some mocked, others mourned. But no one looked away. In response, the palace issued a carefully worded statement, one that neither confirmed nor denied the sketch's authenticity. It emphasized the Queen's wishes for privacy, reinforced Beatrice's role as temporary steward, and urged the public to respect the sanctity of the collection. But the statement only deepened the intrigue. What else was hidden? What else had the Queen buried in silence? Behind the scenes, royal PR teams were in meltdown mode. Emergency meetings were called, messaging strategies rewritten. Conspiracy theories surged online. Some claimed the leak was intentional, an internal plot to discredit Beatrice. Others believed the Diana sketch was fake, fabricated to test public loyalty. And then, without warning, Princess Eugenie's name was dragged into the scandal. A rogue outlet suggested she had helped leak the image out of spite, though no evidence supported the claim. The damage to the sisters' fragile truce was immediate. What little remained of their bond now hung by a thread frayed by lies neither of them had authored. But as the world debated whether Beatrice deserved the gift, she made a bold move, one the Queen herself never dared to make in her lifetime. After weeks of silence, Beatrice stepped into the public eye not as a royal, but as a guardian of truth. In a speech that brought tears and thunderous applause, she announced what no one expected: the Queen's private collection would be revealed to the people, piece by piece. Starting now, the announcement came without warning. The Royal Academy of Arts had only listed it as a private event, no press, no cameras. But when Princess Beatrice appeared, flanked not by palace guards but by curators and archivists, the message was clear. This wasn't a royal spectacle, it was a reckoning. With her voice steady, yet thick with emotion, she delivered a speech that would redefine her legacy forever. This gift, she began, pausing as emotion caught in her throat, was never about me. It was about what we choose to remember and what we dare not forget. There was no mention of scandal, no response to tabloids. Only purpose. The first piece unveiled was the very one that had ignited the storm, a sketch of Princess Diana. This time presented not as a leaked secret but as a tribute. As orchestral music played softly in the background, the room fell silent. Attendees, critics, patrons, and even former dissenters stood frozen. In that moment, Beatrice transformed the narrative. She had not exploited the Queen's collection. She had protected it until the world was ready to see it. And now, under the exhibition title Elizabeth's Eyes, she was giving it back. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 24 hours, attendance records shattered. Lines curled around the Academy gates. People traveled from every corner of the country to witness what had been hidden for decades. Art historians called the exhibit a once-in-a-generation unveiling. Emotional visitors wept in front of pieces that captured the silent grief, unspoken hopes, and fragile humanity of Britain's most iconic women. What began as a controversy had evolved into a national catharsis, and the impact wasn't just public. Sources confirmed that King Charles himself visited the exhibition in secret, escorted with cameras, his presence logged discreetly in the Royal Academy's visitor records. Observers noted that he lingered longest at the Diana sketch, reportedly nodding once before leaving without a word. Camilla, by contrast, was conspicuously absent, neither mentioned nor acknowledged. Her silence spoke louder than any royal decree. As praise for Beatrice surged, headlines transformed. No longer the forgotten royal or the scandalized steward, she was being hailed across the media as the people's princess reborn. Not because she sought the title, but because she never asked for it at all. She had stepped out from the shadows not to claim a legacy, but to honor one. And in doing so, she had created something far greater, a bridge between the monarchy and the people. Built not on tradition, but on truth. But one mystery still lingers, and it lies in the final, unopened crate left behind in the Queen's vault, a crate marked only with a name, Philip. Just when the story seemed over, one crate remained unopened. It was sealed in 1997, marked in the Queen's own handwriting with a single word, Philip. What it contained would send shockwaves through the palace, rewrite royal love stories, and reveal the Queen's most personal memory, one she never wanted anyone to see, except Beatrice. No staff were called. No photographers were present. When the time came, Beatrice returned to the vault alone, accompanied only by the archivist who had protected its contents for over half a century, Margaret Hensley. The crate had sat silently beneath the others, untouched and undisturbed, but it had always carried a weight Beatrice felt from the moment she first entered the room. The handwriting was unmistakable, not formal, not royal intimate. Philip, nothing more. With trembling hands and a quiet nod from Margaret, she pried open the crate's lid, unaware that what she was about to uncover would not only redefine her grandmother's story, but her own. Inside lay a series of carefully bound letters, aged, delicate, and pulsing with life. They were written between 1946 and 1948, before the crown, when Elizabeth was simply a young woman in love. The letters told of longing, fear, and defiance. One described her anger at the resistance to their union. Another, her desperation to be seen not as a future monarch, but as someone capable of choosing her own heart. And Philip, passionate, unfiltered, rebellious, wrote back with declarations of love that were as defiant as they were romantic. "Let them watch," he had written. "They will see that what we build is stronger than any rule." But it was what lay beneath the letters that left Beatrice breathless, a painting, unfinished and quietly luminous. It depicted Elizabeth and Philip at Balmoral, surrounded by trees and sky, mid-laughter. The brushstrokes were gentle, interrupted. The Queen had started it herself. Her initials, painted faintly in the bottom corner, proved it. There was no crown, no palace, no throne. Only love. Attached to the back was a small handwritten note. 5 words that stripped away all formality, all duty, all reign. "This is how I wish to be remembered." Beatrice didn't speak. She didn't cry. But in that stillness, she understood everything. This final piece wasn't meant for the public. It wasn't history, it was truth. And her role, her responsibility, wasn't to display it, but to protect it from being consumed by legacy hunters and royal biographers alike. As she closed the crate once more, Beatrice made a vow, not to the monarchy, but to the memory it left behind. She would protect this final fragment of the Queen's soul, not with silence, but with care. Not locked away, but kept safe from distortion. The documentary ends not with scandal, not with titles, but with a whisper of emotion and revelation. In a monarchy built on duty, one woman dared to choose love, legacy, and art. And she chose Beatrice to carry it forward. And so, from a locked vault to a beating heart, Princess Beatrice became more than just a royal. She became the Queen's chosen soul. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.